My name is Lori Montgomery and I'm 26 years old. The pain started on a Tuesday afternoon while I was standing in the produce aisle of a grocery store near my apartment, comparing two bags of spinach like it was the most important decision of my day. One second I was reading a nutrition label, and the next second the fluorescent lights above me started spinning like a carousel that wouldn't stop. My knees buckled before I even understood what was happening to my own body. I remember reaching for the shelf, missing it completely, and then there was only darkness and the distant sound of someone screaming for help that I later realized was a stranger, not me. I was rushed to the ER unconscious. Paramedics told the hospital staff later that my heart had gone into a rhythm that shouldn't be survivable outside of immediate treatment, some kind of arrhythmia triggered by an undiagnosed condition nobody had caught during my last checkup. The doctors worked on me in ways I only learned about afterward, through fragments other people described to me once I could finally listen without wanting to fall back asleep forever. A nurse named Priyanka, who I would come to know very well over the following days, told me that when I arrived, my lips were already turning a shade of blue that scared even people who see this kind of thing every single day. The hospital called my emergency contacts within the first hour, because that's protocol, and because the attending physician wanted my family standing in that hallway in case decisions needed to be made that I couldn't make for myself. My mother picked up the phone. I know this because Priyanka told me herself, sitting on the edge of my bed 3 days later, her voice careful the way people get when they're about to say something they know will hurt you. The hospital called my emergency contacts, but my parents said, "We can't, your brother has a game." My younger brother Dean had a regional basketball tournament that weekend, the kind of tournament he'd played in a dozen times before and would play in a dozen times again. My mother apparently didn't even pause before answering. She just said it flat and final, like I was asking her to skip a dentist appointment instead of asking her to come see if her daughter was going to survive the night. I didn't know any of this yet. I was still unconscious, tubes running into my arms, machines keeping count of a heartbeat that kept threatening to give up entirely. The doctor overseeing my case, a tired-looking man named Dr. Aldous Reyes, who had clearly delivered this speech more times than he wanted to count, called my parents again that same evening. This time he didn't mince words, because he'd apparently learned that families needed the truth delivered without softening if they were going to actually show up. Even after the doctor warned, "She may not make it through the night," they never came. My father took the phone that time, according to what Priyanka later confirmed from the call log the hospital kept. He told the doctor they'd try to come by the following week if things had settled down. Settled down. As if I were a fever that would eventually break on its own, as if I weren't fighting for every breath in a bed 20 minutes from the house I grew up in. I spent that first night in and out of consciousness, catching pieces of conversation between nurses who thought I couldn't hear them, catching the particular quiet that fills a room when the people who are supposed to love you the most have decided a basketball game matters more than your last hours. When I woke up fully for the first time, nearly 2 days later, I asked the nurse if my parents had called. She hesitated in a way that told me everything before she said a single word. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. As far as the hospital records showed, they hadn't asked a single question about whether I was alive or dead. I spent the next 5 days in that hospital room alone, recovering slowly, watching the door every time it opened and feeling something inside me quietly reorganize itself each time it wasn't them. Nurses became my temporary family. Priyanka brought me a magazine on her break because she said I looked bored out of my mind, and Dr. Reyes started checking in on me longer than my chart probably required, maybe because he'd seen the way my face fell every single time footsteps passed my door without stopping. A week later they finally showed up. But by then, everything about how I saw them and how I saw myself in relation to them had already started to change in ways I didn't fully understand yet. I didn't know it in that moment, lying in a hospital bed with a healing heart and a completely broken sense of what family was supposed to mean, but the version of me that walked out of that hospital was never going to be the same daughter who walked in. Something had shifted permanently, and there was no undoing it, no matter what they said when they finally decided to appear. A week later they showed up, walking into a hospital room they expected to still contain me, wounded and waiting and grateful for whatever scraps of attention they were finally willing to offer. Instead they found an empty bed, sheets already stripped, the machine silent, and a nurse at the station who informed them I'd been discharged 3 days earlier. My mother later told a cousin she felt confused standing there, like she'd walked into the wrong room by mistake, except the room number matched exactly what the hospital had given her the first night, back when she still had the number saved from that first phone call she'd rushed through so she could get back to watching Dean's game. What they didn't know was that I hadn't gone back to our family home even once during those 3 days. My best friend, a woman named Selwyn who I'd known since college and who had actually shown up at that hospital within an hour of getting my text, took me straight to her apartment the moment I was cleared to leave. Selwyn sat with me through 2 nights of me staring at the ceiling, replaying the sound of a nurse's voice telling me my parents chose a basketball game over my life, replaying it until the shock finally cracked open into something colder and steadier underneath. By the 3rd night, I wasn't crying anymore. I was making a list. I used those 3 days to do something I'd never had the courage to do before, something that had been years in the making, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself until I was staring death in the face alone. I called a moving company. With Selwyn's help, we went to my parents' house while they were both at work, and I collected every single item that belonged to me, every box I'd left behind after college, every photo album with my childhood in it, every trace of myself that existed inside those walls. I left behind exactly one thing, a note, placed carefully in the center of the kitchen table where I knew they'd see it the moment they walked in. The note was short. I didn't need paragraphs to say what years of being an afterthought had already said louder than words ever could. I wrote that I hoped Dean's game was worth it. I wrote that a stranger named Priyanka held my hand through the night they were told I might not survive, and that a doctor who'd never met me before that week showed more concern for my life than they had in 26 years. I wrote that I wasn't angry anymore, because anger required hope that they'd change, and I didn't have that hope left in me. Then I wrote that I was done, that I'd removed myself from their address book, their phone contacts, and their lives, the same way they'd apparently removed me from their priorities the moment it became inconvenient to care. When they read it, their faces drained, according to what Dean told Selwyn weeks later during a conversation neither of us expected to happen. He said our mother sat down at the kitchen table without saying a word, reading it twice like the first pass hadn't fully landed. He said our father picked up his phone to call me and then set it back down, realizing he had no idea what he'd even say after silence that loud. Dean, apparently, was the only one who seemed to understand immediately what had happened and why, because he told Selwyn later that he'd overheard the first phone call from the hospital and had begged our parents to go, only to be told the tournament mattered more since scouts were watching that weekend. In the months since, I've built a life that doesn't have room in it for people who measure my worth against a basketball schedule. Selwyn helped me find a small apartment across town, close enough to the hospital that I sometimes wave at Priyanka through the window of the coffee shop where she gets her morning tea. Dr. Reyes still checks in occasionally, a follow-up call here and there, and somewhere along the way those check-ins started feeling more like the family I'd been missing than actual blood ever did. My parents have tried reaching out through relatives, through mutual friends, even through a letter that arrived at my old address and got forwarded to me by accident. I haven't responded to any of it, not out of cruelty, but because I finally understand that love isn't supposed to require a medical emergency and a possible death sentence before someone decides to show up. Dean and I still talk sometimes, carefully, the way you talk to someone you don't blame but can't fully trust either. He's the only piece of that house I haven't fully let go of, mostly because I remember him as a kid who used to bring me water when I was sick, long before either of us understood what our parents were capable of prioritizing over their own daughter. As for the rest, I've stopped waiting by any door for footsteps that might belong to people who love me. I built new footsteps instead, ones that showed up when it counted, and that's the family I choose to keep now. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to choose you and didn't, hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories like mine still waiting to be told, and I want you here for every single one of them.